All right, I don't think I'm going to use the press on this one. I think I'm just going to tap it in. I'm going to use one of these from the press and tap it in. So I've got a little grease in here to start with. And the reason why is the surface area underneath here, it's just not level. It's just a pain. So I'm just going to do it this way. It's not exactly easy keeping this thing lined up, to be honest with you. Well, going side to side seems to be a much better process than trying to come at it straight on. All right, I think we're fully seated, but I'm going to give it a couple more love taps here. All right, I've got our new bearing fully seated in the assembly there. It's bottomed out in its ledge, and we have clear view of our snap ring groove. All right, let's get ready to install the hub. Get ourselves a little grease down in the bearing. Everything becomes a grease rag eventually in this shop. And we're just going to do a tappy tap tap on this guy and slip it into place. That looks violent, but it was actually quite gentle. Looks good to me. All right, let's go ahead and install our driver's side ball joint. These are left and right side, so if you purchase both for your car, know that the driver's side is tilted towards the rear of the car. Well, actually, they're tilted. They're both tilted toward the rear of the car, so that's how you know. If you hold the flange away from you like this, and it's tilted to your right, it's a driver's side. And if you're over here and facing the other way and it's tilted to your left, you know it's a passenger side. All right, show you what I'm doing here. I'm going to install the hub assembly on the strut next. And you've got this little flange on the back of the strut, and it's got to line up with this groove, and there's a hole right there for the bolt. I'm going to put this thing and the strut on the car all at the same time. All right, let me get my bolt. Kind of awkward. I can't really film this well, really. And the bolt goes through there. We're ready to put this thing on the car. All right, so before we start the reassembly, we got to pull this strut out of here. And you want to be careful with your little pipes and hoses and electrical connections and so on and so forth. These simply slip into the side of the strut there in that little press fit connection. And you want to hang your brake disc caliper appropriately. I've got it hanging on the strut right now, but I'll need to move that before I remove the strut. So Let me disconnect these hoses, hang the brake caliper someplace else, and get up on top and loosen the strut. All right, I've got a 21 millimeter on our impact wrench here to take off the top of the strut. That, my friends, was the sound of a strut hitting the floor. See there? That's the way you do it. All right, we had to go back to the parts house and exchange the struts they gave me. They gave me the wrong ones. I'm not going to go into that fiasco, but anyway, we got a new top plate here. That simply goes in the strut tower hole, and you have a new nut, and we'll set that right there, and then we'll slip our new strut into place. I'm going to disconnect the lower control arm from the torsion bar. There we go. And now we have room to work. I think that's going to work out. I think that's going to work out real nice. We need to get this ball joint in a position that's conducive to installation. And let me loosely put our ball joint nut on there. All right, I'm going to show you what we have here. I got a floor jack. Hey, look at that. It's the restored Walker. I still haven't painted it though. And I've got the whole assembly raised up in the air far enough to where I can hold it there so I can put the nut at the top of the strut tower. All right, so with this situation at hand, I can slip the bolt into the lower control arm and tighten it back like that. All right, so really we're golden. We got all the major bits in place, all the hard parts anyway. So I'm going to raise the car back in the air and finish putting this whole side back together. All right, we've got the strut and hub assembly back on the car with the brakes reinstalled and all the pipe work and the wires and stuff back in there plugged into their usual locations. And we have the tie rod end reconnected, 33 foot-pounds on the tie rod connection. All that stuff just goes back together the way it came off, so no big deal there. We have the lower ball joint disconnected, and we'll put the axle in next, and then after we get the axle in, we'll tighten up the lower ball joint. All right, I've got the one of the bolts on my triple square adapter and a long extension. Try to get the bolt started. And I'm going to be working up in here, and you're not going to be able to see any of that because I'll have to lift the axle in place, get this bolt started, and try to tighten those bolts on the inboard side. So, all right, I got that first one started. That was a bit of a challenge. So the rest should be fairly straightforward. All right, we've got our lower ball joint bolts tightened down, all three of them, and we have our inward bolts on the axle tightened down as well. Kind of a slow, tedious process. Tighten one down, slip the wrench at the top, and then use the crowbar and turn the wheel and move on to the next one. Up next, we're going to tighten the axle nut, but we're not going to do the final tightening until we get the car on the ground. And it takes, I don't know, it's somewhere around 150 foot-pounds. It's online. I'll look it up later. But we'll give an initial tightening, but the final tightening of this nut needs to be done on the ground. All right, the driver's side of the car is all done. We're going to wait to do the final tightening on the axle nut until we lower the car. But right now, we're going to move on to the passenger side. And since we went to school on the driver's side, I'm expecting it to go just like that. All right, so as you know, the passenger side is a little bit different. This axle shaft is longer, and it also has this cover here. that I'm going to remove to make things a little easier for us. So we have 3 6mm Allen head bolts. Here's one, the other 2 are up there. They're hard to get to. All right, my battery's talking to me on my camera, so I'm using the drop light to illuminate the situation. As I was saying, we have 3 Allen-headed bolts up there on the left. You can see on that cover, you can see one of them. The other 2 are up top, out of the way. So up next, I'm going to get my 6mm Allen wrench out and get those 3 bolts out and get that cover out of our way, and then we can move forward with removing the axle. All right, we've got a 6mm Allen-headed socket to remove our axle cover, and we're going to give it the old Scotty Kilmer try here after we've already broken the bolt loose, but we make a show for the camera. All right, so we've got that one to get off, and 2 more that I haven't broken loose. They're on the top, so it's kind of hard to film that, and I'm not going to do it. So let me get this thing off of here, then we'll move on. All right, we've got our cover off. That's what this guy looks like here. Clearly, I have an oil leak. Another one. I don't know where it's coming from. It may just be a leaky drain plug. As a matter of fact, I think it is. Yeah, I need to change the washer out next time I do an oil change. And of course, you know, in the previous video, we replaced this down tube here because I thought an oil leak was coming from there. But really, I think in addition to that, I believe we just have a valve cover gasket that's leaking down the back of the motor. So I have a gasket on order, and it should be here in a few days. But for right now, we've got our cover off, and we can get to all our bolts now. So let's move on and break these loose. All right, I've already broken this one loose. It looks like a good situation here, a little better than the driver's side. But I need to get it in that position there for each one to break it loose with my impact wrench. So, all right, so I've got a couple of lug bolts in the wheel here. I'm going to use my pry bar on the rotor and move the next bolt into position. All right, now we have our bolt back in the proper position. We can break it loose. Yeah, that was pretty tight. There we go. I think I wrote in the description of the previous video that the axles in this car are cheap aftermarket replacements that I had put in at a European garage, or a garage that services European cars. I was out on a weekend trip, and the axles just, man, they imploded. And the car, it literally felt like you were inside a paint mixer. It was the most horrific vibration I ever felt in a car in my life. So, and I was out away from home, and between a rock and a hard place, and I had those cheap axles installed, and we were able to carry on, but they didn't last very long. So anyway, the guy that did the work clearly put these bolts in with a lot of force. All right, the compressor came on. I'm going to have to break that one loose with the 3-foot bar. All right, let me see if I can just use this 18-inch breaker bar. There we go. Without putting the pipe on it. I've got a screwdriver in the brake rotor up against the caliper, preventing the wheel from turning. So let's move on to the next one. Let's see if the impact will get the next one. I don't know if my impact is getting weak or it's just a piece of junk or what. Not doing that one either. I got plenty of air over there. Man, that mechanic really put these things in there. I tell you what. And this one is still pretty doggone tight, even as I loosen it. So let's just move on over here to the other one, because it's probably in the same condition. Oh, I think we've done them all now. Yeah, we have. Cool. All right. All right, we got all 5 of those, or all 6 of those inward bolts broken loose. Let's go ahead and remove the axle nut. All right, up next I'm going to remove the 3 bolts on the lower control arm to the ball joint. And of course that was a 30 millimeter on the axle nut, and I've got a 13 millimeter here for the lower control arm. And there's our lower control arm hardware that will get replaced. I guess I'll remove the tie rod end next. It is a 19. Little tappy tap tap for our tie rod end connection here. There we go. It's loose. All right, we've got everything loose on the outboard end. I'm going ahead and remove all of the remaining inboard bolts here. I didn't remove these before because I didn't want the axle flopping around on me, if you know what I mean. I just wanted to break them loose first because that was the most challenging part of the job. It's the whole bad before good philosophy, which I adhere to. Personal philosophy I came up with when I was a little kid. Bad before good. What does that mean? It means get the unpleasant bits out of the way first. Or the hardest bits out of the way first. And then the rest of your endeavor is a cakewalk. That's not going to go anywhere. Let's lower the car. All right, let's go ahead and pull this axle out. Let's move our tie rod out of the way. And the only thing holding this entire assembly to the car will be that nut on the top of the strut. After I pull it out of this lower control arm. There we go. Easy peasy. Up next, we're going to remove the brakes. Need a 7 millimeter Allen for that. Take these little covers off of here. Ooh, I got an idea. Work smarter. Oh, poo, my battery's about dead. All right, I'm gonna get a piece of rope and we're gonna tie this brake caliper to the control arm. We don't want any fallage. And we're going to loosen this brake line from the strut. This flexible, well, it's actually an electrical connector. To remove that from the strut. And there's an electrical connector here on the back side. It's kind of a booger to get to. All right, got everything disconnected from the hub and strut assembly, and it's just dangling by the strut bolt on the strut mount in the engine compartment. So I'm going to lower the car, and then I'm going to put a jack and some blocks underneath this to keep it from falling and hitting the ground. And then we'll undo the bolt at the top and we'll lift the whole thing out of the car. You know what? I changed my mind. I don't want to do that. Pain to try to do it that way. So I'm going to do it the same way I did the driver's side. I'm going to disconnect this bolt here and pound this downward, remove it from the strut, put this over on the bench, and then remove the strut separately. You're probably saying to yourself, well, he sounds like he finally wised up. You're probably right. Well, that's the easiest thing I ever did. All right, now let's lower the car and get the strut out. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. All right, 21 millimeter with an impact. And I'm going to hold the strut down here with my other hand to avoid, you know, drastic damage. All right, there's one original Volkswagen Strut from 2005 with 250,000 miles on it. All right, let's rebuild our passenger side hub assembly. Let's start by pounding the hub out of the bearing with our 28 millimeter socket. I think we're getting good at this. All right, now we have to remove the snap ring so we can get our bearing out. I love this snap ring. It's so much fun. All right, snap ring out. Got a little better at it that time. Let's go ahead and remove our bearing. All right, I got a big socket to get us started here. I'm just going to set it on the block. Yeah, that moved us a little bit. I got these things from that bearing kit. They're pretty useful for other things on occasion. That works pretty well, actually. All right, bearings out. Let's get our ball joint out of here. That's an 18 millimeter. All right, let's go ahead and insert our new bearing now that we've got our ball joint removed. A little grease. Really, this does nothing to make the insertion of the bearing any easier. The only thing it does is prevent corrosion. All right, let's use the old bearing to finish the job. I believe we are fully seated. You can always tell because the sound and the bounce back of the hammer hit changes. All right, time for the infamous snap ring. That went much better than the driver's side. All right, let's install the hub next. So I got this really old, nasty pack of grease here. I don't use it for anything but, you know, stuff like this. If you're going to pack bearings, you'll always buy a brand new pack of grease and you use it and then you never use it for that again. You always start off with a new pack of grease for obvious reasons. If you get debris in there, you're just going to destroy the life of your bearing. So anyway, enough of that. All right, so seeing as how it's just me out here in the shop, the strategy that I'm going to use for installation is as follows. I'm going to install the strut onto the hub assembly, and then I'll insert the bolt, tighten that down, and I will take the lower ball joint and I will install it onto the lower control arm. I will also remove the bolt from the torsion bar to the lower control arm to give myself some more flexibility. Then you take the entire assembly, the hub and the strut together, and you set it onto the ball joint. Now you have the whole affair perched and it's sitting there and you don't have to hold it. Now you just pivot the strut inward and line it up with the hole in the strut tower and tighten the nut on the top. Then once the nut on the top is tightened up, I do all of that to avoid trying to manhandle that whole affair up into the car when you can just set it on the ball joint. I won't tighten the ball joint to control arm bolts down fully at that time, clearly, because I have to pull it back away to get the axle in there. It's just a temporary mounting of the lower ball joint onto the control arm to facilitate installation. So now that I've explained my brain-damaged procedure, let's move on. It's a really beautiful day outside today. I think it's going to be about 50 degrees and there's a bunch of sunshine and the neighbor is leaf blowing because that's his favorite activity, which is fine. He keeps a very nice, clean yard. Our bolt goes in real nicely, and we'll tighten that up once we get it on the car. All right, we're going to disconnect the lower control arm from the torsion bar. And this will give us the flexibility we need to install the strut hub assembly. I've got the ball joint loosely installed with just 2 bolts, hand tight. It's just to give ourselves something to set the shock and hub on while we position it to install the top nut. There we go. Now we're going to maneuver the strut into its proper hole, line it up, and reinstall the bolt in the lower control arm. Now we can lower the car and install the nut on the top of the strut. All right, I've got a floor jack underneath, raising the strut assembly slightly to get it high enough to start the nut on this end. And as far as tightness goes, that's about as far as you want to go. If you start to expose the threads, that's good enough. All right, got the lower ball joint tightened down to the hub assembly, 33 foot-pounds. So let's disconnect the ball joint from the lower control arm now so we can get our axle in. It's not that tight, I just didn't feel like looking for a wrench. Move our brake caliper out of the way. Suspend it from the strut tower. All right, I've got the I got that cover reinstalled here. I probably didn't need to take it off to. I didn't need to take it off to remove the axle, but I just thought it might facilitate removal of the axle. But nah, I really don't, because the axis that I used was the bottom bolt, and I just rotated each time. So I went ahead and reinstalled it. I cleaned it up, clearly. We've got a severe oil leak, and I think it's coming from the valve cover gasket or something else. So that's going to be, work on the top of the engine. So we're going to, so we're going to go ahead and finish this up, get this axle in here next. All right, I got the axle slipped up in there. Not a problem at all. Actually, a little easier than the driver's side. The driver's side's a little tighter, a little more confined space. And we'll get 2 or 3 bolts in here, and we'll lower the car. Let's get the other end of the axle installed so we can rotate the whole thing and start tightening up bolts. All right, let's position this thing around here and get our axle into place. All right, we're gonna have to dance with this a little bit. Got to get it into the right geometry so we can slip it into the lower ball, into the lower control arm, which I am going to loosen yet again to give myself some flexibility. Flexibility of being able to loosen the lower ball joint or the lower control arm to help yourself manipulate everything. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's nice right there. Yes, sir. All right, we'll have to, we're going to tighten down the ball joint. And then when we get ready to get everything tightened down, we will put a jack under this and raise it up just slightly so I can put my bolt back in place right there. So let's go ahead and put our new axle nut in place. Let's just get it started. I want to go ahead and start getting these bolts into the lower control arm next. Line up the holes. The bolts that they gave you with the lower control, with the ball joint, are a grade of 10.9, which from what I gather is actually tougher than grade 8. All right, tightening up the lower ball joint, raised everything up. We can tighten up our torsion bar again. And let's go ahead and ratchet down on our axle nut. All right, let's reattach our tie rod. All right, we've got our 19 on the torque wrench here. We're going to go to 33 and a little more. All right, looking good. And let's put a couple of lug bolts in here so we can turn the wheel, or so we can install the remainder of the inboard axle bolts. Inboard portion of the axle is done. All right, so these ball joints came with this little grease fittings that you need to install. I've already done the driver's side. And we'll need to go, I ran out of grease though, so I need to go get some. You want to make sure your grease fitting points in a direction that's conducive to putting grease in. Before I do anything else, I'm going to go get some new grease and grease that ball joint. All right, passenger side's all done. Brakes are back on. I got the tie rod torqued down, ball joint torqued down. Got the grease alamite inserted into the lower ball joint and I have it filled with grease. So just sort of mundane stuff that anybody can do. Also have the various wires and hoses positioned back into their proper locations there on the strut. You can see the hoses attached to the strut there. So everything's tightened down. All thing to do now is put the wheels back on, lower the car, and tighten up our axle nuts. All right, folks, we're back on the ground. Axle nuts tightened to 148 foot-pounds and then loosened half a turn. Then you mark a point. You mark 2 points. You mark 1 point on the nut and 1 point on the hub. And those are 60 degrees apart. And then you tighten your 12-point nut until point A meets point B. You can look that up online at the forums.tdiclub.com. But for right now, our front end rebuild on our Volkswagen Golf is all done. Quite frankly, I learned a lot on this job. I've never done a front end job on a Volkswagen before, so I learned a little something. I hope you did too. And if you see some things that maybe I did wrong or have some advice for me, feel free to comment below. But for now, that's all she wrote. This is the end of our front end rebuild for the Volkswagen, so I appreciate you guys stopping by my channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to be notified whenever I release a new video, don't forget to click that little bell down below. You guys take it easy and enjoy driving your Volkswagen. Have a good one.